The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Liberty. Liberty.
Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Desperate Democrats launch a full-out assault on the integrity of the Attorney General. We'll explain why, and it's not just because they hate President Trump with every fiber of their being. Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Democrats go for the jugular on the Attorney General and then complain that he won't show up when they change the rules on him. We'll talk about what the Democrats' endgame is here and bring on LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza to break down the Democrats' questions and Barr's answers and where we go from here. And then there were 22 Democrats running for president, that is, and LibertyNation.com chief political correspondent Graham Noble will join us to sort out the wheat from the chaff. Plus, we'll drill down on one of the Democrats' most radical ideas, reparations for the descendants of slaves.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We kick things off with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out some of the most wacky, astonishing, and damnable things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. The long knives were out for Attorney General William Barr on Capitol Hill this week. He endured a 5-hour grilling by the Senate Judiciary Committee on Wednesday, and then refused to show up for a House Judiciary hearing on Thursday because they changed the rules on him. And, of course, Barr's no-show sparked widespread condemnation from bloodthirsty Democrats. There's really just one clip you need to hear about the Democrats' treatment of Barr in the Senate hearing, and it's from Hawaii Senator Mazie Hirono, who was eventually slapped down by Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham.
Mr. Barr, now the American people know that you are no different from Rudy Giuliani or Kellyanne Conway or any of the other people who sacrificed their once decent reputation for the grifter and liar who sits in the Oval Office. We know more about your deep involvement in trying to cover up for Donald Trump. Being Attorney General of the United States is a sacred trust. You have betrayed that trust. America deserves better. You should resign.
Not really. To this line of questioning.
So,
listen, you've slandered this man.
Well, it's no wonder a man of integrity like Stephen Moore bailed out of joining the Federal Reserve, as he did this week, given the Democrats' scorched earth policy of destroying people's reputations with impunity because of political differences. President Trump made clear what this is all about, uttering the dreaded C word.
They tried for a coup. Didn't work out so well. Corruption at the highest level. A disgrace. Spying, surveillance, trying for an overthrow. And we caught them.
Senator Josh Hawley put it all in perspective after that Senate hearing with Barr this week, bringing the whole thing back to contempt for Trump and his voters by the FBI's top investigator.
August 26th, 2016. This is a text message from Peter Strzok, a top counterintelligence investigator who we now know helped launch this counter-spy investigation of the President of the United States. Peter Strzok says, "Just went to a Southern Virginia Walmart. I could smell the Trump support." smell is capitalized. You want to know what's really going on here? You want to know why the counterintelligence investigation really happened? You want to know why we're all really sitting here today? That's why, right there, is because an unelected bureaucrat, an unelected official in this government who clearly has open disdain, if not outright hatred, for Trump voters, then tried to overturn the results of a Democratic election. That's what's really gone on here. That's the story.
But not the end of the story. When Barr refused to show up for the House Judiciary Committee hearing one day after running the gauntlet in the Senate because they changed the rules on him, deciding to stick staff lawyers on the Attorney General instead of the members of Congress themselves, an unprecedented move in the history of the House of Representatives. He and the president were smeared by committee chair Jerry Nadler, who refuses to let go of the Mueller report and used soaring language to argue that it's now necessary to investigate everything else about Trump.
If all we knew about President Trump were contained in the four corners of that report, there would be good reason to question his fitness for office. His promise to obstruct our work extends far beyond his contacts with the Russian government and allegations of obstruction of justice. The president has also prevented us from obtaining information about voting rights, ACA litigation, and his cruel family separation policy. The Secretary of the Treasury continues to ignore his clear statutory obligation to produce the president's tax returns. The very system of government of the United States, the system of limited power, the system of not having a president as a dictator is very much at stake. But I am certain that there is no way forward for this country that does not include a reckoning with this clear and present danger to our constitutional order.
Clear and present danger, fitness for office, cruel policies at the border, Trump's tax returns, the president as a dictator. This is all they've got, and they're going to run with it, all of it, knowing they can't beat Trump on the issues, the economy, jobs, rising wages. They're desperate, and it's clear what's going on here. Democrats were looking to lay a perjury trap for Barr with their battery of staff lawyers. And since Barr's too smart to fall for it, they're smearing his reputation, issuing public condemnations designed to discredit him in advance of any and everything he reveals in his escalating investigation of the Obama Justice Department spying on the Trump campaign. Of course, the problem for them is that Barr will be presenting facts and evidence of wrongdoing, unlike the Mueller investigation, which revealed that Trump-Russia collusion was nothing more than the left's hopeful fantasy played out on the taxpayers' dime for 2 years and crippling the Trump presidency. Meanwhile, another side of the Democrats was on display this week from the Blame America First crowd as Venezuela descended into full-on revolution amidst the wasteland it's been turned into by socialist totalitarian dictator Nicolas Maduro. The increasingly infamous freshman member of Congress, Ilhan Omar, said, "It's America's fault."
A lot of the policies that we have put in place has kind of helped lead the devastation in Venezuela, and we've sort of set the stage for where we are arriving today. This particular bullying and the use of sanctions to eventually intervene and make regime change really does not help the people of countries like Venezuela.
Is there anything bad in the world that the U.S. is not responsible for? Not according to this freshman member of Congress and her fellow socialist travelers like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Meanwhile, there was nothing less than a horrifying statement by a state representative in Alabama, perhaps revealing the truth of the pro-abortionist view of unborn children, as the left attempts to liberalize abortion laws to the point of terminating pregnancies right up to the point of birth or even beyond. But the even more horrifying part of what State Representative John Rogers of Alabama said came when he responded to criticism of his statement by the president's son. Listen.
Some kids are unwanted. So you kill them now, kill them later. You bring them in the world unwanted, unloved. Then you send them to the electric chair. So you kill them now, kill them later.
Earlier today, Donald Trump Jr. condemned your comments. Do you have a response to the president's son?
Hey, that's an honor. That proved the right to make a decision about abortion. Him being born, that's proved the right to. That's a very good defense I have for abortion right to him. Look at him and say, I wonder should have aborted him when he was born.
Just so we're clear, what that guy said was that Donald Trump Jr. should have been aborted. But in order to take some of the edge off that horrifying statement and leave you with a decent taste in your mouth, we present the statement of Rabbi Yisroel Goldstein of the synagogue in California where the latest anti-Semitic attack occurred, demonstrating a side of President Trump that the media completely ignores.
He spent close to 10-15 minutes with me on the phone. He shared with me condolences on behalf of the United States of America, and he spoke about his love of peace and Judaism and Israel, and he was just so comforting that I'm really grateful to our president for taking the time and making that effort to share with us his comfort and consolation.
We will break away for a moment and then come back to examine the ever-expanding field of Democrats running for president from top to bottom.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel because
Truth
is making a comeback.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, the conga line of Democratic candidates looking to unseat President Trump has now grown even longer with the addition of one Michael Bennet, senator from Colorado, the 22nd candidate to seek the presidency and the 7th member of the U.S. Senate to add his image to the Democrats' totem pole. For sure, you cannot tell the players without a scorecard. So we brought in our chief political correspondent, Graham Noble, to help us sort it all out. Hello, Graham.
Hello, Tim. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Now, I'm going to just rattle off the names of the 22 Democratic candidates and have you take the discussion in whatever direction. Here they are. Michael Bennet, Joe Biden, Cory Booker, Pete Buttigieg, Julian Castro, John Delaney, Tulsi Gabbard, Kirsten Gillibrand, Mike Gravel, Kamala Harris, John Hickenlooper, Jay Inslee, Amy Klobuchar, Wayne Messam, Seth Moulton, Beto O'Rourke, Tim Ryan, Bernie Sanders, Eric Swalwell, Elizabeth Warren, Marianne Williamson, and Andrew Yang. Take it from there.
I would imagine this list is going to thin out pretty quickly once things really start to get heated up here, particularly when we get close to and into the primary debates. I think there's going to be a lot of drop-off there. I really think that, at least half that field has no chance of lasting any more than, 3 or 4 months.
Why are so many candidates running? I mean, and so many running with zero chance of winning.
In your most recent article on this subject, Tim, you actually pointed out something which nails down the underlying reason why a lot of these people run for president, and that is just so that they can say former presidential candidate, bumping up their speaking fees and burnishing their bona fides, as it were.
Right, and so they can then get a better shot at a book deal later. What I learned from running for president. I mean, it's a natural, is it? Now, what as we turn to Joe Biden here, Graham, what to make of recent revelations about the clear front runner, Joe Biden, and the influence he exerted to land high-paid positions and cut massive deals with companies for his son Hunter in Ukraine and China.
I personally think it's a major problem for him were he to get the nomination. The Ukraine thing is bad enough, where we know that he actually exerted influence in Ukraine to prevent an investigation that could have swept his son up in something pretty bad. But I almost think the worst problem for him is his son's relationship with China, because China is, when it really comes down to it, China is our main adversary on the world stage.
Now, you said Biden would have trouble with his ties to Ukraine and China and sweetheart deals for his kid, making millions of dollars for a no-show job in a business he knew nothing about, in a country he knew nothing about. But you said that Trump would make a big issue out of this. Don't you think that the other Democrats will pounce on this? I mean, you got 21 other candidates, all of whom want to take him down before he is in a position to get the nomination. You think it will be only in a general election that these are problems, or will it haunt Joe Biden throughout his primary run?
Yes, you would imagine that a lot of these other candidates are going to jump on Biden's ties to China and the Ukraine. Of course, I sometimes wonder just how many American politicians do have financial links to China. Because we know, for instance, she's not running for president, but we know, for instance, that Senator Dianne Feinstein has, her and her husband have extensive links to China. So you wonder how many of these candidates might want to even be talking about China, knowing that they themselves might have some Chinese skeletons in their closet.
That's a good point. And they may want to stay away from it, too, because it also makes the Obama administration writ large look bad, which is not something you want to do in a Democratic primary. Now, Biden calls his candidacy, Graham, a battle for the soul of America. But isn't he really battling Bernie Sanders for the soul of the Democratic Party?
This is a watershed primary for the Democratic Party, because the candidate that emerges is going to tell us a lot about the direction in which that party is going. And if Biden were to emerge as the nominee for the presidency in 2020, in a way, that would be quite a black eye for the progressive wing. I mean, Biden likes to say that he's progressive, but in reality, I don't think he is. I don't consider Biden a moderate, but by modern Democratic Party standards, he certainly is a moderate.
Yeah, but by modern Democratic standards, he's like a right-winger.
Right, yes.
Graham, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tim.
Graham Noble, Chief Political Correspondent for LibertyNation.com. Quick break, and then we're back to discuss one of the several radical proposals advanced by Democratic presidential candidates: reparations for the descendants of slaves.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, because
Truth
is making a
comeback.
Far more important than my political future, and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Reparations for the descendants of American slaves is an idea floated in various forms since passage of the 13th Amendment after the Civil War outlawing slavery. Supporters of the idea have offered several arguments, but perhaps the easiest to visualize involves the analogy of a poker game played with a loaded deck, and what to do with the ill-gotten gains of the crooked card players once the truth is uncovered. Talk of reparations long existed only on the leftmost fringes of the political spectrum, but after decades of scattered discussion, the concept has now become a unifying principle in the crowded field of candidates seeking the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination. Virtually all of those candidates support or accept the concept of reparations in some form. Many of the 22 candidates have openly supported reparations, and none have renounced it. The question among those looking to unseat President Trump is not whether reparations are appropriate, but in what form they should become policy. Bernie Sanders, who dismissed reparations as divisive in 2016, is now on board with it.
There are massive disparities that must be addressed. There is legislation that I like, introduced by Congressman Jim Clyburn. It's called the 10-20-30 legislation, which focuses federal resources in a very significant way on distressed communities, communities that have high levels of poverty. We have to do everything that we can to end institutional racism in this country.
Kamala Harris, whose prospects for the nomination have been lagging as Bernie's have risen, says she's for reparations because the playing field has not been level for people of color.
We've got to recognize people aren't starting out on the same base in terms of their ability to succeed. And so we have got to recognize that and give people a lift up. And there are a number of ways to do it. Part of my initiative, again, around the LIFT Act is that same point. Lifting people up who are making less than $100,000 a year.
Now, the most vocal presidential candidate on the issue of reparations has been someone you probably forgot was even in the race, Julian Castro, who takes the argument back to an unjust founding of the nation itself.
This country should resolve its original sin of slavery, and that one of the ways we should consider doing that is through reparations for people who are the descendants of slaves. It is interesting to me that under our Constitution and otherwise, that we compensate people if we take their property. Shouldn't we compensate people if they were property?
So how would reparations be administered? Well, they'd likely involve payments to minority communities and individuals who can prove they're descendants of slaves. One can only imagine a mirror image of the so-called one-drop rule, which was historically employed to label and discriminate against anyone with even one drop of black blood, but which would now presumably be used for the opposite purpose, to qualify for reparation payments. Now, the question arising from this call to action is whether reparations are something we already implemented almost 50 years ago when affirmative action programs were written into law. Now, there's no hard numbers to quantify the results of opportunities granted to minorities and women through affirmative action, but we all know how it took hold in the 1970s and has been steadily cemented into the fabric of American life in the almost 50 years since. And we certainly know that this preferential treatment of minorities, though women are actually a majority, in an attempt to reverse historical discrimination, did result in millions of such opportunities, as was the intent of these programs. Now, whether affirmative action is justified preferential treatment or actually just a different form of discrimination than the one it seeks to reverse is a question we're still vigorously debating almost half a century later. We still haven't settled the issue of whether affirmative action constitutes payment in full for any debt which may be owed by society. Interestingly, the nation's first black president did not support reparations, believing it would be a convenient way to simply buy off those demanding social justice. Here's what Barack Obama stated Quote, I fear reparations would be used as an excuse for some to say we've paid our debt and to avoid the much harder work of enforcing anti-discrimination laws in employment and housing, lifting people out of poverty, improving public education, and rehabilitating young men coming out of prison, unquote. Now, reparations are a modern concept and rare in history. Historically, the term reparations dealt primarily with the indemnification of states ravaged by war, such as those required of the Germans after World War I. But in the aftermath of World War II, the term began to acquire a broader meaning, extending beyond wartime to the domestic actions of a state. There's two primary historical instances of reparations. The most significant was Germany's payment to Holocaust survivors, or the equivalent of almost $9 billion in today's dollars. The U.S. also offered a far more modest $20,000 to each of the more than 80,000 Japanese Americans detained in internment camps during World War II. The seemingly sudden and widespread support among leading Democrats for reparations may turn out to be the culmination of a concept that has slowly crept into political conversation since 1965, when President Lyndon Johnson vowed to rectify the economic disadvantage blacks faced when he declared in a speech, which was considered a harbinger of affirmative action, quote, freedom is not enough. It is not enough just to open the gates of opportunity, unquote. Since that time, the trickle of interest in reparations beyond affirmative action has become a wave in the Democratic Party. And you can well expect to hear much discussion about it in the upcoming presidential debates, which begin in just over 1 month. We'll break away and then come back and analyze the congressional hearings with Attorney General William Barr.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now it is time for the ultimate segment of Liberty Nation Radio. We entitle it Talkin' Liberty. It's self-explanatory. As we welcome in our regular contributor and constitutional lawyer and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, Scott Cosenza. Do you realize how much time we carve out of the segment just introducing all your various credentials?
Tim, it's one of the most important parts of the segment, which, as you know, is my favorite part of the show in total. So I think it's time well spent, and hello to you.
Well, now that we've established your unshakable bona fides, let's discuss, we can't avoid it, Scott, Attorney General William Barr appearing first before the Senate and then before the House, not because they changed the rules on him. Let's cut to the bottom line and then let you fill as you see fit here. It seems to me what the Democrats are doing is trying to destroy Mr. Barr's reputation as a hedge against whatever he ultimately reveals about Obama Justice Department spying on the Trump campaign. That's coming down the road shortly, and they want to discredit him well before these revelations. Agreed?
Yes, and also, Tim, they do want to try to discredit the report itself. They want to be able to keep the whiff of collusion out there, even though I think to you and I and almost every other American who's cared to spend a moment critically analyzing what's happened, the notion that there was active collusion between Trump and Putin or Russians is a dead letter. But there's still enough pockets out there that, you know, this helps keep that whiff alive. And also just the idea that Donald Trump and his administration are reckless with the law and the truth and bad overall. So it's a great thing for them to keep that alive, as opposed to the alternative, which would be to say, well, what, we're sorry, let's move on to something else.
Right, or there's nothing here.
Yeah.
Thanks for spending 2 years, Mr. Mueller, and producing a 432-page report. We now, the verdict is in, and we're going to move on to actually legislating some things.
Right.
But they can't beat him on the issues, Scott. They can't beat Trump on the economy or unemployment or business and consumer confidence rising at rapid levels, deregulation, rising wages. They can't beat him on that stuff. So they have to try and discredit him and his attorney general. But the worm is starting to turn now because they've gone from looking back at the Mueller report and so-called collusion to now we've pivoted to a point where we're going to look forward to finding out about how the whole investigation began at the start with the Obama Justice Department.
And if you can call Barr a perjurer, then you can certainly mitigate any damage from that report.
Was or was not the Democrats' decision, Jerry Nadler's decision, to try and throw out staff lawyers to question Barr, trying to lay a perjury trap, get him to say something that they could later say was perjury, and Barr wasn't going to fall for it. He's too smart for that.
Yeah, you do want to lay those traps, or at least you want to question him like he's a defendant, like he's a murder suspect, and you want to sweat him out in a room rather than the more appropriate oversight role. I don't have a problem with the staff using attorneys to direct their questions when appropriate. And I know we didn't complete the thought. I just wanted to say I do think, for the record, that Bob Barr did not perjure himself based on the evidence that I see. These politicians who are on these committees are often also rans in terms of interrogators or questioners. They're good at being politicians, but they're horrible at actually being lawyers. Kamala Harris, for example, asked William Barr if he had seen the underlying evidence of one of the Mueller witness documentary. Basically subpoenas get returned with, I think he said, millions of pages of evidence. And Kamala Harris wants to know if Bob Barr read those through. And I thought, it's sort of like, Tim, if you had the CEO of a bank in front of you and say, did you read this supporting documentation to Mr. Smith's mortgage application for his, $200,000 house on Main Street? And you're like, he's CEO of a $1 billion bank. He doesn't read supporting documentation for there's an army of people to do that. When you're a senior supervisory attorney in these offices, you don't do that. And the sad thing is, of course, Kamala Harris knows that because she is the former Attorney General of California. So it's entirely disingenuous, I think, a lot of these attacks on General Barr.
The arrogance that just is emitted by Kamala Harris is breathtaking.
And also, Tim, her assessment of the intellect and critical thinking skills of the electorate must be pretty low.
Well, or simply misguided or miscalculated. All right, enough with William Barr. Bad week for Baltimore. The mayor, Catherine Pugh, resigns amid a scandal about a children's book that she wrote that she, how should we say, commingled with the public trust she holds as mayor of Baltimore. She resigned, didn't even do it herself, sent out somebody from her staff to announce it. But at the same time, judges are denying a request by Baltimore State's Attorney Mosby to dismiss thousands of marijuana convictions. What is this one about?
5,000 almost convictions, Tim. The Baltimore State's Attorney making good on her campaign promise to kind of basically full reverse criminal prohibition of marijuana in Baltimore. So that's a good thing, that moving forward on that promise, I think, and it's certainly pro-liberty to avoid these convictions. The problem was they went about it the wrong way. They used what's called a writ of coram nobis, okay? And that is typically submitted by a defense attorney to the court. But in this case, the prosecutor submits it, and the judges basically wrote her a nasty gram that said it's entirely inappropriate for the prosecutor's office to submit this because you're the one who are supposed to be prosecuting crimes. Not to mention the fact that Mosby herself in the past directed police to increase their enforcement efforts in some of these areas to combat the drug war, okay? And then she says, oh, these arrests, improperly target African Americans. Like, well, you sent the police into these communities, right? I mean, that's what you did. So I think there's a mechanism here, Tim, for the Ms. Mosby to accomplish the goal of basically releasing these people from the weight of those charges. But they just went about it ineffectively. And it was appropriate for the court to rebuke the prosecutor in this way, because it was an inappropriate motion. But I think they should go about it the right way. All they need to do is basically set up a kind of assembly line process whereby it's very easy for those people, either without a lawyer or with a maybe legal aid they could get involved with. In other words, try to make it low cost, right? These people generally are not represented by high-priced lawyers, to basically come in and have them file their own petition, which then the prosecutor's office can not oppose before the court. So there are pathways here to get it done. I think it's encouraging that she tried to do it at all. We do have to wrestle, Tim, nationally with what happens when these marijuana laws are changing all over. And what happens to those people who were criminals before? Right. The states have options. Do you want them to stay criminals, or do you want to say, no, that behavior shouldn't have even been criminal when it was applied to you, and you can now enter sort of, these people are presumably some significant number of them. Like retroactive justice in some sense. But for some significant universe of these people, these convictions are holding them back from employment. They could be used against them in custody situations. It's a boat anchor. And so it's appropriate to have it lifted. It would just be nice if Ms. Mosby chose the right legal vehicle to do so. So maybe in the future we'll see that happen.
Meanwhile, as we move south to Florida, in the Sunshine State, lawmakers, as they're called, are attacking the biggest problem that America faces today, Scott. Plastic straws.
Plastic straw bans. Don't undersell it. The state of Florida did a great thing, Tim. They said to all these little municipalities who were enacting these plastic straw bans, you can't ban the plastic straw. I think we really see a growth, Tim, nationally in cities and towns who wish to create their own laws that are separate and distinct from all the laws around them. And they seem to do so with an ignorance to the fact that it would become an unworkable society if, for instance, gun laws or vehicle tint laws or straw laws, you had to, what do you have to do? Every time you pass through a town, you have to stop and look at what, like a giant billboard of the different codes?
Like a big speed trap when you go through one of those small towns and suddenly the speed limit goes from 60 to 25 within the space of,
and let's take a company
feet.
like, for instance, the McDonald's company. How many different straw requirements should they have to be able, to deal with? Not to mention the fact that, of course, it's a made-up crisis. So what happened was literally a child just made up a number for how many straws were consumed and used in this country. I think it was something like 1 million a day or something, just some ridiculous number, which then motivated all these people to think they were doing good by banning straws. And in fact, it's going to have no impact except for probably put out a bunch of people who work at bunch of people out of work who work at straw factories, I'm guessing.
And not to mention a real bump in sales of paper straws. You think they're behind it, Scott?
Have you had one of these paper straws?
In the past, I guess.
After like a half hour, you go back to that straw.
It's done.
Mush. Yeah,
it's finished.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, you'd think they would like the fact that plastic straws are reusable.
There you go. Don't give them any ideas.
No,
that'll be the next thing.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, with a special appearance by dedicated Biden correspondent Tim Donner.
When warranted.
When warranted, which has been every week of late. And our other podcast, a more civilized version of Liberty Nation content entitled The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, hosted by Mark Angelides, both of them, plus the radio show available on demand online at LibertyNation.com anytime, anywhere, plus from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week, same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.